Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another episode of the Meridian Point podcast. And today we're joined by Raciel Castillo, founder of RC Technologies. It's a groundbreaking company developing direct air capture technology to combat climate change. There's a mission with a purpose. I can get behind that. A passionate innovator who transitioned from executive roles in media production and technology to tackle what he calls the biggest challenge we all face. I can attest to that. Raciel leads a team of engineers working to revolutionize carbon capture. Their unique approach uses urban infrastructure to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and convert them into sustainable products. He brings not just technical expertise, but an inspiring vision for how technology can help create a cleaner, more sustainable future. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Raciel to the stage here. Thank you so much for joining us, Raciel. It's really a pleasure to have you. Can you hear me okay?
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Yes,
Great. All right.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, all good. Yeah, sound check done. So let's start with your origin story. What inspired you to enter the climate tech space and specifically focusing on carbon capture?
Yeah, it really started as an answer to a question. I was working on a totally different sector and technology altogether that I'm still working on and bringing to the market. And I was finding a way to sort of digest more information without having to do so much work. So I was listening to podcasts, which I don't really do, but I was listening to podcasts in the background, and one of them was like a science one, where I was like, okay, it's cool, it's up my alley. And the only thing I heard of the hour and a half or whatever that was playing was there's all this gas in the atmosphere. And immediately I just said to myself, I said out loud in my own living room by myself, well, surely we can remove it. And I sketched out our first ever technology. And I really, truly didn't have any clue of what I was doing. I was just like, this is what it needs to do. And then I put my sketchbook down and I went to go work on my other company. And that's really how it all started. And then, of course, over time and research and development, all that took shape and form. And here we are 5 years later, removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere.
So do you have a background in this? You say you put a sketch to paper, and then that sort of was the vision that started this. Was this your background, your engineering background, to be able to... I'm assuming it's a chemical reaction that has to pull CO2 out of the air, correct?
Well, I didn't have a background then, but I certainly do now.
Okay.
Like I said, I just knew what the technology had to do. I didn't even know that there were other players in the industry. I didn't know there was a whole, albeit small, industry of people already doing this and having been doing it for 10 years or so.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I just, like I said, I started that first sketch and I was like, cool, I'll get back to this. And then I did. And, it wasn't until 6 months in that I realized, I was like, maybe I should see if someone else is actually doing this. Yeah. And it turns out there were people, there were two companies. Carbon Engineering was one of them, and then I think Climeworks was immediately after. I don't know if Climeworks was like at the time, but I knew that it followed after, and they were licensing Carbon Engineering's work. So for me, they're not obviously the same company, but I just sort of to me they're sort of the same company because they have the same process.
Yeah, so I'm always fascinated by disruptive technologies like these, and especially going from sort of idea on a piece of paper or a sketch pad to a prototype. Can you walk us through that process? How you sketched it, then you came back later and you did more work. What did that look like for you? that experience?
Yeah. So it looked like 3 whiteboards nailed to my living room wall with a bunch of sketches and a bunch of words, sort of strategizing. I really build and see the vision first, and then everything else kind of follows that. So it started with a sketch, and then it began with like before I even knew that there were other people in the space, that there were all these other things, all these other components in the industry, and that there even was an industry. I had already designed the technology. I had designed the strategy. I had figured most of all of that stuff out. And then it sort of just it snowballed from there. It was like, you write everything on the board, and then you begin to branch out and build on those initial ideas. So it started as that sketch, and then it really transformed into this behemoth of an ecosystem of technology and of technologies to solve, as you mentioned, the biggest problem we're all facing right now, which is climate change.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely in the news, and all we hear is that it's dire. The situation is dire, and that countries aren't doing enough, governments aren't doing enough, people aren't doing enough, people's behaviors aren't changing fast enough, and so we're gonna go extinct. We're gonna destroy the planet.
That's the doom and gloom message.
Yeah, help put some context behind that. I'm sure you have more information than the average person in this space. Maybe give us some hope. I'm jumping ahead with my questions, but I think it's an appropriate time to address that, right? That big elephant in the room. Can we make the necessary changes to avert a disaster?
Absolutely, 100% yes. And it's also why I'm so confident in not only my company, but in the world at large. There are so many people tackling this problem from so many different sides and angles and to different degrees that the average person doesn't know that. And it's really the reason why this message of doom and gloom has been perpetuated, because there's a lack of knowledge of what's actually happening behind the scenes. Yes, there are companies and governments that aren't moving fast enough, but there are also companies that are ahead of everyone else. And that's sort of what I don't even need to say that I hold on to it, because that's the truth. That's the reality. And so we do have enough time to get the ball rolling. The ball has already started rolling, and we have enough resources, money, technology, intelligence, manpower, or human power. We have all of these things working in our favor. We just need to start coming together a bit more rapidly to form the puzzle that is the solution to climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna come back to this thread in a minute, but I wanted to focus on what your company is doing, RC Technologies, and the approach that you're taking seems unique, right? You're using rooftops and urban infrastructure to rather than requiring a lot of land to put these, big carbon capture devices. What led you to this decision?
So initially, when I was sketching out the different variety of sort of housing mechanisms that would house the technology, they came in really all different shapes and sizes. And that's what I love about our technology. And just like the ability of carbon capture in an urban setting is that when you're working on this sort of problem, you can be as creative as you possibly can, because that's just the nature of what we're doing. And so we have that ability to be as versatile in our design and as versatile in our approach to capturing carbon emissions in the urban landscape. And so it started off with one particular design. It was sort of what will ironically come in the future at RC Technologies. And then it's sort of like, okay, we're hitting the urban areas. At the time, it was 70% or 70% of cities or 70% of emissions come from cities. And so I was not aware, I was not focused on anything else except building the unit. As I mentioned, I sort of create the vision first and then everything else falls into place after. And I created this box and I was like, this is really beautiful. It's really lovely. And then I stepped back and I was like, we'll have this box, but it's going to need to be a lot bigger than this. And it was always sort of the city or the urban landscape approach. And so I never really had an interest in remote areas. I think deploying all of your resources to remote areas limits all of us. It limits our ability to really approach climate change in a way that allows us to focus more on the byproduct of the solution. In other words, the capture yield. And so using that approach of turning cities into carbon sinks, which was always like the tagline is like RC Technologies turning cities into carbon sinks. I started looking at different ways of doing that, and I lived in a very windy city when I was building this portion or part of this portion of the technology. And I love walking around at night or early in the morning when the city's empty, and I would just see all of these different possibilities of where we could place a unit. We could place it there. Oh, we can place it over here. Like it would look really good up there. And then you look at sort of wind patterns and you see how the wind behaves in a major city where there are tall buildings, where there are a large number of buildings, and the wind is kind of just like looking for where to go. And if you've ever been on a rooftop and you've leaned over the edge a little bit, or you've looked over the edge a little bit, you notice that gush of wind that comes up. And so instead of using fans or anything like that to move the air to us, we just let the air do what it does and place our unit next to it. And it's really this beautiful symbiotic relationship of the wind entering our unit and our ability to capture those emissions. So it started sort of small, and then it sort of snowballed into rooftop placement, highway placements, bus station, retrofitting bus stations into large carbon capture units, buses themselves even, cross lights, all these things I saw as carbon capture units. And so for me, that was like, we can convert all of these cities into carbon sinks by doing this, and many other things, planting more trees, things of that nature.
Yeah, interesting. So because 70% of the emissions come from cities, it makes sense logically to have carbon capture close to the source of carbon emissions, right? So highways and cities and all that stuff. And since your device is a passive device, it relies on the movement of air to funnel through this thing, and it, I guess, it does its magic and captures the CO2 and leaves the air pure. That's really quite brilliant. So what happens to the CO2? So you capture it, then what? What does it become?
So we take it from our units and we bring it back to our facility where we further process it. And then in that processing, we decide what area we can, create a sort of pathway to other. We would be taking it from our units, processing it, and then transforming it into like graphene and other materials, synthetic jet fuels, things of that nature. We're trying to limit the amount of materials that we would use that keep aspect or component to it or effect, and focus more so rather on the carbon negative effect of a pathway of utilization, as we call them. And so graphene is one of those pathways. We can use synthetic jet fuel. We do that. Obviously, we need to do that So if we can, start there and then further create cleaner fuels that aren't, CO2 based, or even, things of that nature, then not only can we create these products from the CO2 that we need to remove from the atmosphere, but we create an entire portfolio of materials that are reusable and recyclable and have, a large need in several industries across several sectors. So you look at graphene, for example, is being touted and was in the early 2010s as the replacement for silicon. And so silicon is in all of our devices. It captures and transfers data and memory and all of this. So graphene can do it in less space and at a higher capacity and faster.
Interesting.
Yeah, there are so many ways. Graphene is really our primary focus, but there are a ton of materials that we can make out of CO2. You can make shoes. You can make anything, almost anything, out of CO2. So being able to put that CO2 and effectively store it into that circular economy, we're creating jobs, we're creating new ways of consumerism, cleaner materials, more sustainable materials, more effective materials across the board. So really, it's I think utilization is the way to go. I always thought that was the way to go. I never once wanted to go into storage until I realized we can do like above ground storage. And even then, it's sort of like we would do that only if our customers absolutely require it.
Interesting.
We would store it above ground. Yeah.
So all this, of course, requires creating new, not just new uses for these products, but new products, right? Is that something you're going to envision doing, or are you thinking that the market will find ways to use these raw materials that you produce from the CO2?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just us. There are other companies out there that are, creating bioplastics out of seaweed. So we're able to do things of that nature and create a sort of reserve for supply chains to tap into and to pull from. And then you have other companies that are creating bioplastics. You have other companies that are creating architectural materials out of nature-based solutions, out of byproducts. So in other words, waste. You have companies that are creating tiles, for example, out of fungi. So it's not just, this is a sort of industry-wide approach of leaving behind the old ways of doing things and sort of sprouting these new ways of doing things, not just in our actions, but in our approach.
It's really fascinating that, you mentioned it before, that you have hope, maybe more than hope. You're optimistic that there are solutions on the horizon because you are in this industry and you see all the innovation that's happening out there and all these new technologies that are being developed to create products that don't harm the environment, or products that are easier to decompose, whatever. They don't leave an impact on the environment, or to your point, that end up being carbon negative, which is really what we need, not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative, because we've put so much more of it into the atmosphere. Of course, there are those that believe that this is all just a big hoax, and that we're just going through a cycle of warming, and followed by maybe a cycle of cooling, and we're just making a lot of fuss for nothing. What would you say to them?
It would be wonderful if that were the truth, because then we wouldn't be having to fight for our lives, essentially, which I know sounds a bit dramatic, but sadly, that's not the case. And I think a lot of the controversy around climate change and climate denial has come from large oil corporations using technologies like direct air capture, like carbon capture, which in the industry, those are two different things. Carbon capture is point source, so anything that any company or process that emits directly into the atmosphere, that's point source. And then direct air capture is obviously what it sounds like, is directly capturing it from the air, from the atmosphere, once it's already left that point source and has gone into the atmosphere. And so when you look at oil companies who are using this kind of technology to keep the oil propped up and to keep these oil companies in business, it can be seen, and it is seen, in a negative light. And there are some positives to that, because obviously we're still relatively primarily and dominantly dependent on oil for power, for energy. But as that transition continues to happen, we'll be depending less on oil and more on renewable energies, more on other methods for energy creation. But I think the biggest argument is that you have companies that are using these kinds of technologies in the wrong ways, and that's always going to happen in business. There are people who don't really care, and then there are people like me and many others who do care, who are doing the right thing, who want to do the right thing. And so you're always going to have that argument, at least until we don't have that argument anymore. But right now, right now that's what it is.
Yeah, it is. So I mean, there are those also that say that carbon capture is not something that we should spend a lot of money on. We should put all our effort into moving away from oil and carbon producing fuels, and carbon capture just gives us a crutch to stand on so that we can keep burning oil. What do you say to those folks?
That is the argument, or part of the argument, at least. I would say we have never not been in partnership with Mother Nature. We've never not been focused on a natural approach. But my biggest fear is that putting all of our efforts into nature-based solutions, when there is an expectancy of a high degree of drought or a high level of drought, which would then essentially create forest fires, and all of our efforts would have been, for the lack of a better word, burned down to the ground. Or a better phrase. And so I used to think that carbon capture was the only solution. And I was never outside of the nature-based approach, but that's not my area of expertise. So I am not focused on that so much as I am on the technology, because I know what the technology can do and I believe in it. But I can see why people fear that. I think our biggest advantage is that we do have all of these technologies on the table, and that if we can just work together in a collaborative effort or in a collaborative fashion to bring all of these working technologies and effective solutions and prop those up and get those up and running like super quickly, then it works in all of our favor to do that. And that's my biggest argument, and that's my biggest sort of approach. I've seen, I had a conversation with someone online on LinkedIn a couple of months back during 2 weeks or so before Climate Week in New York, and he goes, hey, the tone in his text was sort of like, we're on opposite ends of this thing, and I'm over here, and I don't really believe your end, and you probably don't believe mine. And I was like, bro, this is not the conversation. I fully believe and support the nature-based solutions. I'm interested in bringing the technology to the forefront, so I'm going to focus on that. But we can partner together and go head to head together on this and bring both solutions to light. Because ultimately it's going to be like, the idea is that with as many technologies and solutions that there are on the table, the ones that work are the ones that we should be focused on. And quite frankly, both of them work. Yeah, they both work. It's just one is a bit more fragile than the other, and it takes a lot longer. Nature-based solutions take a lot longer to remove the CO2. Will they do it? Yes. We know that with certainty, because we live on this planet, so we know. But my biggest fear is that is a bit fragile. So we should not put all our eggs in one basket.
I totally agree with that. But I also take, I wouldn't say exception, just want to debate one thing you said, that we live in partnership with nature. And I don't know that that's true. At least maybe in our in our history, when we were hunter-gatherers, then we were more in partnership with nature because our population numbers were lower. There was certainly we were I guess the apex predator, but again, our numbers were low, so we lived in partnership with nature. We harvested nature for our clothing and our food, and we left a fairly minimal impact compared to what we're doing now. But I would say that's shifted over the last couple of thousand years, and certainly in the last couple of hundred years. And I don't know that in my lifetime we're going to get back in balance, but hopefully it'll happen in future generations. What do you see in the next, say, 10 years, 20 years in the climate scene, if you will?
Yeah, I see us getting back to those roots of incorporating nature into our everyday lives. I've always been sort of focused on the future while living in the present. and I can see your concerns. I fully understand why you may have them, but I see a future where we are okay, where we made it out of this thing alive, and not just alive and not just like, hanging on by a thread, though it can feel like that sometimes, but a future where we've thrived through the chaos and through that transition, and then we're thriving on the other side of it as well. And that 100% incorporates nature. Like, nature is a part of that. It has to be.
Yeah.
We live on a natural planet. So while I hear your concerns that we may not be the most in touch with nature and we may not be the most in partnership with nature, the underlying sort of relationship is that it is nature. We're not going to live in this sort of cyberpunk reality, I mean, we could. It would be relatively cool, but I don't think on this planet.
Well, I mean, they are building that huge building in, where is it, Saudi Arabia or Dubai or somewhere, that several kilometer long building. What's it called?
I think it's called The Line or something like
that. Yeah. And it's a totally artificial environment. You never have to step outside. It's all indoors. It's climate controlled. And of course, you have to have that kind of an environment because, well, it's 130 degrees. 40 degrees in the summertime, right? And you couldn't survive out in the open. But I hear your point. I do hear your point, and I hope that the thing that worries me, and I think that worries a lot of people, is that we are a world with many different nations in different stages of development, and with governments that are in different stages of maturity, and just in this country alone, we're going through a change in leadership, let's call it that, that may blunt the efforts of people like you, and certainly people like you, and to a lesser extent people like me that want to do something, but you are actually doing something. You're building a company that will and part of the ecosystem that you live in will help us get back in balance with nature. But political changes are afoot, and how do those, these types of changes, these yo-yoing back and forth every 4 or 8 years happen? How do we sustain change?
I say first and foremost, going with the flow. I've never really, in the beginning, I was keeping tabs on everything in this industry. I was keeping tabs on policy. I was keeping tabs on change left and right, and the technology sector, what was going on in nature, what kind of companies were doing this and that. And it got to a point where there was something new happening every single day that I couldn't keep up. And I didn't want to. I was so overwhelmed that I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do what I was always doing and focus solely on the technology, and everything else will sort of fall into place. That's my philosophy. It's not, it may seem like a laid back approach, but it's what I see is this movement has to happen regardless of what side of the table you're on. So it doesn't, like, whatever you believe in. And in fact, I'll tell you, there are many climate deniers out there who are now starting to see how real climate change is when they don't wake up to the same amount of snow that they used to when they were a kid, when the summers are hotter than they used to be 20 years ago, And people are seeing these very real, very tangible effects. And they're like, oh, actually, this climate change thing might actually be real. So as it relates to like administration and world leaders, but particularly in this country, because it changes every 4 years, and sometimes it remains the same for a 4-year period, I would say that eventually people are just going to have to deal with the reality that climate change is real and that we have to do something about it. And that's been the conversation for a very long time. Everyone knows it. Everyone who's in the industry and everyone who's in the industries that are surrounded or sort of attached to the industry, and let me tell you, they all are. They all know. Everyone in industry, everyone in policy, everyone in government knows how quickly each government moves, and what those world leaders do is it's going to differ from country to country and state to state. But eventually, we're all going to end up at the same place. I don't think, and I don't ever wish to send a message outside of hope and positivity, and not to lean on the side of like, abandoning all caution and being like, oh, everything's going to be great and we're all going to be fine and the world's lovely and all this stuff. And it is. But we have to be aware that there are so many moving parts that are moving in this direction that you're either going to get left behind or you'll have no other choice but to act. And you've seen so many people. Yes, we have a new administration coming in, but you've seen so many people at sort of like the lower levels of government and at the state level who are younger, who are aware of what's going on, who are actively doing something about it, and who have the education and the wherewithal and the information that is available in the science community to back up their approaches to action. And so there are a lot of moving parts to this. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a one time thing. It's a movement. It's becoming a way of living. And everyone else is going to have to catch up to that. Like that's just the reality of it. And so as it relates to government, humans, other like fellow humans who are affected by what decisions that government makes, regardless of where you are in the world, people forget that the government really is for the people. So we have that sort of ability to protest against these kinds of things. And I don't think we're going to need to do that much longer because, like I said, these are very real effects that are happening. We don't get as much snow as we used to. The ice caps are actually melting. It's hotter every summer. Like these are real things. It's not a news article. It's not a figment of our imagination. These are very real things.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love your enthusiasm. I love the message of hope that you bring, and the message of positivity, and that, and I trust that you are in a unique position in the people that you work with to know that you're not just blowing smoke up people's behinds. This is based on what you know and the people you talk to and stuff like that. So I'm encouraged by that. I'll just share a little story before I ask you the last few questions. And I was speaking to someone the other day who is a staunch climate denier, and I brought up some of the same things you did. Well, what about the weather? It's warmed up, don't you think? And things like that. And the ice caps are melting, and the glaciers. She had been to some glacier in Seattle or somewhere up there, and she mentioned that, oh yeah, I went climbing on the glacier, and I said, well, that glacier 50 years ago was much bigger than it was. And her response was, well, the sun is getting hotter, and that's why it's just going through a period of increased activity, and the sun is warmer, and that's why we're going through this change. It has maybe we have contributed some more CO2 into the atmosphere, but I don't think it's what we've been doing. It's just nature. It's just the way it is. And so I didn't argue. I let it go. But that's sort of the mentality I think that that some part of the population is wedded to, whether it's through propaganda by oil companies or whoever, right? The deniers that are saying these things. I think that I'm hopeful that what you're saying will come true, that people will start to see the evidence and the facts and start to make a decision for themselves. So, to my question, so right now your company is pre-revenue, right?
Yeah.
And you are gonna start. I mean, I don't know what the plans are in the future, but I'm hopeful that you become revenue and you start, generating not just for the sake of your company, but for the sake of the
Sure.
world and the people
Right.
that the ecosystem, the things that you do. So what keeps you motivated during these times when you're trying to get your company off the ground?
Um, the fact that all of this is inevitable, the fact that this was given to me through divine sources, and just my belief in my company and myself and what we're able to do in my team, and our approach, how much more effective and efficient it is than everything else, or arguably almost everything else that's out there.
Wow.
In terms of the technology, the landscape of technology solutions. Yeah, I see us as being sort of ahead of everyone else, even though we have not made, even though we're still pre-revenue, I see us so much further along because I'm not looking at what is, I'm looking at what is to come. And so for me, that I'm not worried that we're not making money right now. I'm not worried about that at all. I know we're going to make money and I know we're going to be okay. And not for the sake of the company, but for the very same reason that you mentioned, is for the sake of the planet. And that's always been our focus. So I'm not worried in the slightest, and I never have been. And so I know that it's just a matter of time.
That's awesome.
Right now, yeah, COP29, I think just finished or is finishing up or something like this. The companies that are creating these conversations are not taking action yet, but there's going to come a time very soon where they will have no other reason but to take action or to close down. And so that's where we will be. Hey, we've been here all this time doing this work, and now you can benefit from that. Ideally, in a perfect world, we would be getting those clients now because they're aware, and they are aware. They are aware of their impact, of the lack of action, that creates the impact that their lack of action has. They're aware of these things. A lot of companies are in different stages of action or of movement. So it's just a matter of time for us. I'm really truly not worried, and I really truly have never been.
Yeah, I love that. I love that enthusiasm, and I'm going to be following you, Raciel, and your company, and if you need help, you know where to go.
Thank you. Yeah,
I was curious. Anything I did not ask you today that you'd like to share with this audience?
Anything that you did not ask me? There was a. I think actually, are there any other questions you want to ask me?
There's so much I want to get into. Like I'm kind of geeking out about this especially the technology. How the graphene is formed, and how did this device work, and how do you get it on rooftops, and the whole sort of the carbon exchange, the carbon economy. How does that get going? There's so much, but we are at our time limit. I don't, people's attention spans being what they are,
Sure.
probably won't want to listen to a 2-hour long podcast. So what I will say is that if you're open to it, I'd love to get you back on and sort of get into some of the geeky, more technical aspects, if you're willing to share.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I would
okay.
love that. I would love that. Yeah, because I also geek out on this. I geek out mostly on the vision. I get
Yeah.
really excited. I'm a very visual, creative guy. So for me, it's always the vision. I'm the guy in the company who brings the vision. And we build it up together from there, or we sort of extract what needs to be done from there, and we work backwards.
Yeah.
So I build that. That's the biggest portion of my work is building the strategy and vision. And
you're going to be the next Elon Musk of carbon capture and climate change.
I've heard this a few times. It's so funny every time I hear it. So thank you. It's a really big compliment. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in spite of his his quirks and stuff, I mean, he's had such an impact on society over the last 20 years. I mean, he basically invented an industry, right? That no one thought was possible. No one thought he could do it, and he was able to do it, and not just once, but many times. With SpaceX and with Neuralink, which is still going, and Boxable. I don't know if you've heard of Boxable.
Yeah, I love Boxable.
Yeah, all of these things, right, come from that head of his, along with all the other stuff that comes out of his head. But we won't go there.
Yeah. To that effect, I would say to what you said just a minute ago about how everyone sort of doubted him and didn't think he was able to do it. This is the plight of the entrepreneur and of the engineer.
Yeah.
You're always crazy before you're called brilliant or before you're called a genius. And now everyone calls him a genius. And he's very smart. He's very, very smart.
Yeah.
If you see how he moves, his behavior, you're like, this motherfucker is really smart. Like, he's a really smart guy.
He's a genius. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he is. And so I would say if you would allow me to just say to all those entrepreneurs out there who are working on, mind-boggling, or what others would call mind-boggling, and even for ourselves, sometimes we step back and we're like, what is going on? This is amazing. I know I do that often. And not to toot my own horn, but for all those other entrepreneurs that are out there just hustling by yourself, who perhaps don't even have a team, or who don't even have any money, who are struggling, keep going, and let what people call you fuel you if you want. You really don't even have to. You can just ignore all of them, because soon they'll be asking you for the blueprint, and they'll be calling you brilliant, and they'll be saying, I always believed in you, when they were talking down at you.
Yeah.
Or saying all kinds of negative things and gossiping and whatever. Don't even waste your time. Focus on that. Focus on your product. Focus on your vision. Focus on your company, on the solution that you're providing, and everything else will fall into place. Just don't ever, please, for the sake of all things that are good, don't ever give up.
That's awesome. That's a great message of perseverance and resilience. And I love it. I'm going to clip that and make that a little YouTube short, because that was really good. Well, thank you so much, Raciel, for appearing on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation. And, the theme of this show is about disruption and innovation. And I think, Raciel, you embody those two words like no one that's been on the show before, probably.
Wow,
and so,
thank you. Thank you.
And so, I mean, you do. You're going to, you are going to disrupt this industry, and you're going to provide solutions, I think, for this country and the world in the future. So I'll be following you. Thanks so much for showing up to the show.
Oh my God, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you, Kumar. I appreciate it, and I will definitely talk again for sure.
All right, awesome. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you in our next episode. Bye.